He arrived late to the ceremony to choose his partner amidst the puzzled looks of the whole town. But what made everyone stunned was not his appearance, but the choice he made. Among the most sought-after women, he walked straight to the woman who was forgotten, avoided, considered unwanted. He stood in front of her and held out his hand. Have you ever witnessed a moment that made your heart clench when a person dared to choose something that the whole world turned its back on? If you put yourself in that moment, would you be calm enough to face the scrutiny of all eyes? Would you dare to walk towards the person that the whole village called a burden? But your heart called the right person. Have you ever wondered, sometimes a seemingly small choice is enough to change your whole life? Please join me in the story he arrived. Layden chose the unwanted woman in front of everyone, to listen to the most silent and powerful things. If you feel a touch in your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to accompany me on this storytelling journey. The wind came down from the northern ridge that late spring morning, carrying with it the thin dust of Cedar Valley. That kind of wind always made the wooden planks of the old meeting hall tremble a long, tired groan, like the voice of the West itself. Folks said you could tell the age of a town by the way its buildings complained. And Cedar Valley, well, it had been complaining for a long time. The gathering had drawn nearly the whole town out, ranchers in sweat-stained hats, women in traveling dresses, a few curious bystanders leaning against hitching rails. They lined up in front of the hall, forming a narrow path meant for the introductions, a tradition older than half the folks present. The purpose was simple. Men who had worked these hard prairies needed partners. Women who had traveled from the East needed a chance at a life where they were not overlooked. But simple things were not always gentle. Sometimes they were harsh, and sometimes they stripped people bare. No one felt that more clearly than Rebecca Hale, who stood at the end of the line alone, but trying not to look like she noticed. She lifted her chin, the same way she had learned to lift it back when she stood outside the old infirmary during the scarlet fever outbreak years ago. A straight back did not stop grief or soften loneliness, but it helped a person stay upright. And staying upright was its own kind of strength out here. Rebecca was 38 years old. In the West, that wasn't old, but for a bride gathering like this, it made her nearly invisible. Invisible, yet achingly aware. Around her, the younger women fidgeted with ribboned hats, whispered to one another, and adjusted the hems of dresses that still held the crispness of new cloth. Their laughter came light and quick. Their hopes came lighter still. She used to sound like that once. She no longer remembered when she had stopped. Next name. The match coordinator called, scanning her clipboard. A girl barely past 20 stepped forward. 3 ranchers walked toward her almost immediately, nodding their hats politely. Another girl, younger still, followed. 2 more offers came before she even spoke her age. That was the rhythm of these gatherings. Some women glowed, some survived. Some faded quietly into the background. Today, Rebecca felt herself fading faster than usual. When the coordinator finally reached the end of her list, her voice dropped just a little. Not unkindly, Miss Rebecca Hale, age 38, from Ohio. It was not cruelty. It was something softer, but no less painful pity. Rebecca stepped forward. She felt 20 pairs of eyes move across her like a cold wind. She clasped her hands calmly in front of her skirt. Her dress was simple, a deep navy cotton, worn smooth at the cuffs from years of washing. Her boots carried the dust of long roads. Even her hair, brown with threads of silver, was pulled back neatly, without the soft curls that younger women favored. She did not apologize for any of it. She simply breathed and spoke. "My name is Rebecca Hale," she said quietly but clearly. "I worked as a volunteer nurse during the fever. Before that, I cared for my father until he passed. It was not much of a pitch, but she was not much of a performer. She was simply honest." Silence followed a silence so complete she could hear the wind scrape across the porch steps. No rancher stepped forward. Not one. Rebecca lowered her eyes only for a moment. She had prepared herself for this. She had told herself it would not hurt as much this time. She had repeated the words over and over on the ride into town. "You know what to expect. You know how this ends, but knowing and feeling were never the same. The coordinator shifted uncomfortably. Thank you, Miss Hale. You may step aside. That was the soft way of saying you may return to your life of being unseen. She stepped back into the shadow of the porch, letting the last bit of hope she carried slip quietly from her fingers. The town buzzed again as other women paired off with the men who had chosen them. Plans were being made already: visits to ranches, dinners at boarding houses, future marriages. The buzz grew louder, brighter, as though hope itself had a sound. But none of those sounds touched Rebecca. She felt herself drifting, like a loose fence board carried by a rising wind. She was reaching for her canvas travel bag when something strange happened, something that changed the air around them. A distant rumble, sharp, rhythmic, growing louder. Hoofbeats. The townsfolk turned. Several men shaded their eyes. A horse came into view down the dusty road, a tall sorrel gelding, its coat glinting beneath the sun. The rider leaned forward, urging it on, and dust trailed behind them like a rolling storm. He's late, someone whispered. Again. Another replied, Looks like Elias Ward finally decided to show. The name traveled through the crowd quickly. Elias Ward wasn't just any rancher. He owned the Ward Ranch, acres of tough, wind-beaten land he had carved into one of the strongest spreads in the region. Folks said he worked harder than his whole crew combined. They also said he carried grief the way other men carried saddlebags heavy, worn, always with him. He had not attended the last 2 bride gatherings, and everyone believed he would skip this one too. The horse slowed as it reached the square. Elias swung down in a single, practiced motion. His hat was coated in trail dust. His coat was dark from sweat, and there was a tiredness to the way he stood, as though the morning had already taken more from him than he had to give. But his eyes, they were steady, gray and clear like the sky before a storm. The coordinator hurried forward. Mr. Ward, the introductions have concluded. I can't begin the process again. You don't have to, he answered, his voice deep and even. Just tell me, is there anyone left unspoken? For a hush rippled across the gathering. 20 heads turned. Rebecca felt the shift before she understood it. The coordinator hesitated, then pointed quietly toward Rebecca. Only Miss Hale remains. Elias followed the gesture. His gaze landed on her and did not move. He didn't glance at the younger women. He didn't scan the remaining crowd. He walked slow, sure right toward the far end of the porch. Right toward her. Rebecca felt her breath catch. This had to be a mistake, a misunderstanding. Men like him didn't walk toward women like her. But he kept walking. He stopped a few feet from her and removed his hat. The gesture was old-fashioned, courteous, deeply Western. Miss Hale, he said quietly, I'd like a word. If you're willing. No pretense, no grand speech. Just a simple request that carried weight. The crowd held its breath. Rebecca felt her heart stumble against her ribs. She had spent years teaching herself not to hope. Years learning how to hold disappointment without letting it break her completely. Years trying to make peace with the idea that some lives simply grew quiet before their time. But now, this man, this moment, this unexpected turning of the wind, something inside her shifted. Not hope exactly, but something like the memory of hope. She met Elias Ward's gaze and answered softly, All right, I'm willing. The crowd erupted into whispers, but the wind carried most of them away. Rebecca stepped off the porch beside him, her steps slow, measured, and for the first time in years, the emptiness in her chest eased just a little. Only a little. Just enough to matter. The two of them walked a short distance from the crowd before either spoke. The sun had climbed just above the ridge, warming the valley with a gentle light that softened the hard lines of the wooden buildings. Cedars swayed in the breeze behind them, their branches making a soft, rustling sound that reminded Rebecca of distant waves. She wondered if Elias Ward heard those same sounds, or if his mind lived in places she could not see. He set his hat against his chest for a moment before putting it back on. It was the gesture of a man who respected tradition without being trapped by it. He glanced once toward the busy gathering behind them, then returned his attention to her fully. When he looked at someone, he looked without flinching. It made her feel as though he saw her without needing explanations or careful words. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice low enough not to echo in the morning air. "I apologize for arriving when everything was already settled. I came as fast as my horse would take me." Rebecca clasped her hands, surprised at how steady they felt. "There's nothing to apologize for. Mr. Ward, this is your time as much as anyone else's." He nodded slowly. "I appreciate that." He paused, studying her face in a quiet, searching way. "I asked for those still unspoken for. They pointed me to you." Rebecca tried to hold his gaze, but her breath trembled faintly. She could not help it. "And you came anyway." "Yes," he replied simply. A small silence settled between them. It was not uncomfortable. It felt more like a pause where each person adjusted to the presence of the other. "I've heard your name in town," Elias said after a moment. "Folks speak of the work you did during the fever. They say you stayed while others left, that you have a steadiness most people only pretend to have." Rebecca felt heat rise gently in her chest. Praise was something she had learned to deflect over the years, almost as a reflex. But he delivered it without embellishment. It made her feel anchored rather than exposed. "I only did what needed doing," she said, her tone soft, modest. "Anyone would have—" His expression shifted, almost a quiet amusement. "No, not anyone." One of the younger women from the gathering laughed loudly in the distance. The sound chimed through the air like something out of place, bright and careless. It made the quiet between Rebecca and Elias feel even more private. He took a small step closer, careful not to startle her, careful not to crowd her. His voice dropped again. "I know how these gatherings can go. People look at you and make quick judgments. They see only the surface." She let out a soft exhale. "And you? What is it you think you see?" He considered the question carefully. The wind tugged at the corner of his coat, and for a moment he looked like a man standing at the edge of an unseen choice. "I see someone who has lived," Elias answered. "Someone who has lost things and still stands. Someone who doesn't bend toward attention just to feel valued." He paused, grounding himself with another steady breath. "A woman who knows the weight of silence and the strength in it." Rebecca's throat tightened at the last sentence. Very few people understood silence. Most feared it. But she had grown into it slowly, like someone learning to survive in a house with thin walls. Her quiet had become a refuge. She was not accustomed to hearing it named as strength. She looked away toward the valley, toward the sweep of land that stretched far beyond the reach of the town. "Why come here today?" she asked quietly. After missing so many previous gatherings, Elias watched the horizon with her. When he spoke, his voice held a note of honest weariness. "I have been alone for a long time, not just in the way a widower is alone." He hesitated. "I lost more than a wife. I lost the parts of myself that knew how to speak freely. Work became easier than grief. I guess a man can live like that for a while, maybe even years, but it catches up." Rebecca understood that kind of confession too well. She felt it like a familiar echo. He continued. "This morning, before sunrise, I decided I was done watching life from a distance. I told myself that if I found someone I could speak honestly with, someone whose quiet doesn't frighten me, I'd follow that pull." He turned back to her gently. "When I arrived, you were the only one left unchosen. I don't see that as a slight. I see it as an opening." Her breath faltered. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I'd like to." Rebecca lowered her eyes for a brief moment before lifting them again. She carried her sorrow with dignity, but she also carried an instinct to step away before someone could change their mind. She had experienced too many half-promises in her life. "You should know," she said slowly, "that I'm not looking for salvation, and I can't offer lightness or excitement the way younger women can." Elias studied her carefully. I'm not looking for lightness, he said. Life out here isn't light. I'm looking for someone who understands what it costs to remain kind in a world that isn't gentle. A long breath moved through her, something in her chest loosening, not because he had convinced her, but because he had spoken plainly. He touched the brim of his hat again. If you're willing, I'd like to call on you this afternoon. A simple walk, nothing binding. A soft flutter of uncertainty moved under her ribs, but she steadied herself. A walk, she repeated. Yes, I can do that. He gave a small nod, gratitude flickering in his eyes. Then I'll meet you at the boarding house porch around 3. Rebecca almost smiled. I'll be there. He stepped back, giving her the space to breathe again, and then returned to his horse. She watched him mount with an ease formed from years of living close to the land. When he rode off, dust curled up from the ground and drifted in the wake of his horse. She stayed there until the last trace of him blended into the valley's horizon. When she finally returned to the gathering, the whispers followed her, brushing at her like cold fingers. But for the first time in years, they did not cut so deeply. Something had shifted inside her, small but undeniable. Hope had not returned. Not yet. But the memory of hope had found a place to rest. Rebecca walked toward her boarding house slowly, letting the sounds of Cedar Valley fold around her, the clatter of wagon wheels, distant hammering from the forge, the sighing wind that moved through the pine needles. Life continued in its steady, imperfect rhythm, and she felt, for the first time in a long while, that maybe she was not simply passing through it. Maybe something was waiting just ahead, something she had not dared to name. The afternoon sunlight drifted gently across Cedar Valley, settling into the warm tones that made the wooden porches glow like old honey. By 3 o'clock, the streets had quieted. Most folks had gone back to their chores, and only a few voices floated from the mercantile doorway. It was a peaceful hour, the kind that invited reflection more than conversation. Rebecca Hale stood on the boarding house porch, smoothing the skirt of her simple navy dress. She had worn it countless times, yet today it felt different, as though the fabric carried a quiet tremor. She wasn't sure if the tremor was her own or something in the air around her. She told herself she was too old to feel the nervousness of a girl waiting for a caller. But the truth pressed softly in her chest. She was waiting, and it mattered. The porch steps creaked. Mrs. Hanley, the boarding house owner, stepped out with a tray of afternoon tea. Her kind eyes took in Rebecca with a gentle knowing. You've been standing there for near 10 minutes, she said, placing the tray down. You're not usually one to fidget. Rebecca offered a faint smile. I'm not sure that's what I'm doing. It is, Mrs. Hanley replied, her tone warm, not teasing. There's no shame in wanting something good to come your way. Rebecca looked toward the quiet road. I'm only waiting for a walk. Nothing more. Mrs. Hanley clasped her hands in front of her apron. A walk can change the course of a life. Mine started with one. Before Rebecca could respond, the rhythmic sound of hooves drifted from a distance. The cadence was steady and unhurried. She felt a small pull inside her, something like a thread tightening. Elias Ward rode into view just moments later. He dismounted before the horse even stopped fully, landing with ease in the dust. His coat had been changed, though faint traces of trail dust still clung to it. Even freshly washed, he wore the look of a man who lived close to the land, shaped by mornings that began before sunrise and days that didn't end until darkness insisted. He walked toward the porch, removing his hat out of respect. His gaze met hers, and in that instant, Rebecca felt something inside her settle, as though the world made a little more sense when he looked her way. Good afternoon, Miss Hale, he said. Good afternoon, Mr. Ward. Her voice was quieter than she intended, but steady. He nodded to Mrs. Hanley, who returned the gesture with a polite warmth. Then his attention returned fully to Rebecca. Are you ready for that walk? He asked. Yes, she answered, and stepped down from the porch beside him. They walked toward the northern trail that ran along the edge of the valley. The path was bordered by tall grass that moved in slow waves, the wind passing through it like a whispered hymn. Pines lined the far side of the ridge, and each breath carried the faint, resinous scent that made the west feel like home to those who understood its rhythm. At first, neither spoke. It was not an awkward silence. It was the kind of quiet that allowed two souls to find their step beside one another. The crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the soft murmurs of the valley filled the space gently. Eventually, Elias was the first to break the quiet. I hope you don't mind that I asked you for this walk so soon. I don't, Rebecca replied. It's been a long time since anyone has asked me for anything without hesitation. Elias looked ahead at the trail. I didn't hesitate. No, she said softly. You didn't. They walked a few more yards before he continued. I should tell you something. I'm not a man who makes quick decisions. I think things through. I work slow and deliberate. And still, when I saw you today, something in me knew you were someone worth slowing down for. Her breath caught at the unexpected tenderness in his words. She answered carefully, I've spent much of my life being someone people look past. It's a strange feeling, having someone look directly at me. His steps eased, giving her space. I know that feeling more than you think. Miss Hale? She glanced at him. You, but people speak of you as though you're one of the most respected men in the valley. Respect, he murmured, is not the same as being seen. Rebecca stopped walking, not abruptly, but with a slow, thoughtful pause. She faced him fully, studying the lines around his eyes, the weight he carried in the set of his shoulders. Then what is it you hope to find, she asked. He met her gaze without wavering. A partner. Someone who understands quiet living. Someone who knows how to endure, but also how to soften. Someone who doesn't fear the parts of me that grief hasn't let go. Her heart moved painfully. Not from hurt, but from recognition. She understood grief's grip intimately. She began walking again, and he matched her steps. Her voice came low and steady. You should know I can be quiet. Very quiet. Sometimes because I choose it. Sometimes because I don't have the strength to fill the spaces with words. There's nothing wrong with quiet, Elias replied. Silence can be a kind of home when two people understand it. They reached a small overlook where the land dipped gently into a patch of wild sage. Elias paused and touched the low fence rail. The valley stretched open before them, bathed in the soft light of afternoon. It was the kind of view that reminded people how small their troubles were against the wide breadth of the west. Rebecca rested her hand lightly on the rail, her fingers brushing weathered wood. This place is beautiful. It is, Elias agreed, though he was not looking at the valley. She noticed, but she didn't turn away. A bird called in the distance, and the moment shifted, becoming something almost fragile. Rebecca felt a faint stirring of unease. Not fear, but vulnerability. Elias, she began, speaking his name for the first time. I don't want to move towards something I don't understand. That's why we're here, he replied gently. To understand it together. What if I disappoint you, she asked. He stayed still for a long second. What if I disappoint you, he countered. Life isn't about picking someone perfect. It's about choosing someone willing. The breath she drew next trembled faintly. After another quiet pause, Elias stepped closer, giving her the dignity of space while offering the steadiness of his presence. I'm not asking you for promises today, he said. I'm only asking you to let this begin. She looked over the valley. Her life had been filled with endings for so long that beginnings felt almost dangerous. But his voice held no pressure. Only truth. All right, she whispered. Let it begin. The breeze settled around them as though hearing her answer. They walked back in an easier silence, one that felt shared. When they reached the boarding house steps, Elias paused. Thank you for today, he said. And thank you for seeing me, she replied. His eyes softened. I'll call on you again tomorrow, only if you wish it. She nodded. I wish it. He stepped back, touched his hat with quiet respect, and walked toward his horse. Rebecca stood on the porch long after he left, the ache in her chest no longer just sadness. Something else had taken root there. Something tender and cautious. Something alive. Morning in Cedar Valley arrived with a muted glow, the kind that softened the rugged world before the day's demands began. Thin ribbons of mist drifted above the barns and fences, lingering as if reluctant to let go of the cool air. Rebecca Hale woke earlier than usual, her mind already awake before her eyes opened. Sleep had come in small pieces, thoughts had come in larger ones. She rose quietly, smoothing the quilt with hands that trembled only slightly. Standing beside the window, she watched the valley shrug off the last traces of dawn. She allowed herself one long breath, steadying her pulse. She had agreed to let something begin yesterday. It seemed so simple when said aloud, but beginnings had weight, especially for someone who had lived with endings for so long. When she entered the dining room, a few boarders had already gathered, murmured conversations floated among them. But the moment she stepped inside, several pairs of eyes shifted her way. Conversation slowed. She felt the familiar prickle of being watched, but she walked forward calmly. Years of learning how to remain steady under scrutiny had taught her how to move through moments like this without letting her expression falter. Mrs. Hanley poured her coffee, her movements gentler than usual, as if she sensed the undercurrent in the room. "You're up early today. So are they," Rebecca replied quietly. A few chairs scraped, and someone whispered behind a hand. Another woman leaned in closer to her friend, eyes lingering too long. Rebecca folded her napkin slowly, refusing to show discomfort. After a moment, the door opened. The room hushed, as though the air thickened. Even without turning, she knew who had stepped in. Elias Ward had a presence that filled space without him trying. Something about his quiet strength, the way he carried himself, made people pay attention. He scanned the room briefly, locating her instantly. His gaze softened, the edges of his stern features easing. He approached their table with calm steps. "Good morning, Miss Hale." "Good morning, Mr. Ward." Her voice held more steadiness than she felt. "Mrs." Hanley greeted him with a nod, and he returned it respectfully. "I hope I'm not intruding," Elias said, though there was a subtle certainty beneath his words, the confidence of a man who stood behind his choices. "Not at all," Rebecca replied, lifting her eyes to meet his. He looked around the table once more, his tone growing firmer. "I thought I might accompany Miss Hale on her visit to town today." His gaze flickered to her with a gentler warmth. "Only if that's agreeable to her." "It is," she answered. Something shifted in the room, curiosity sharpened. A few whispers rose like brush fire. Rebecca felt heat touch her cheeks, but she kept her posture straight. She would not shrink beneath their stares. When they stepped outside, the morning air felt like a welcome reprieve. Elias walked beside her in comfortable silence, giving her time to gather herself. "I hope my arrival didn't make your morning harder," he said. She shook her head. "People talk. They always will. I've grown used to slipping in between their words." He glanced at her. "You shouldn't have to slip anywhere." The sincerity in his tone caught her off guard. She pressed her lips together, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. As they began their walk through town, the quiet between them felt different from yesterday. It had shape now. Breath. Potential. Elias broke the silence first. "I meant to ask you something yesterday, but it didn't seem like the right time." "What is it?" "How long has it been since you came here to Cedar Valley?" "6 years," she replied. She paused before adding, 6 years since the fever took my father. 6 years since I lost my home back east. This was the place my cousin lived before she moved further west. I thought I'd stay a few months, maybe a year. But you stayed longer." She nodded. "The town needed hands when the sickness spread. I didn't have anywhere else to be, so I stayed." "That's a hard way to start a life," Elias said softly. "It wasn't a start," she corrected gently. It was the end of one life. I've been waiting to see if another might begin. They reached the outskirts of the mercantile, but instead of going in, Elias paused near a wooden trough where horses often drank. His expression shifted to something more contemplative. "Can I tell you something about my past?" he asked. "You may." He leaned one hand against the rail, his fingers tightening around the wood. "My wife, Caroline, passed 8 years ago." He spoke plainly, but each syllable carried weight. She was a quiet woman, strong in ways people didn't notice. She kept the ranch from falling apart more times than I can count. Rebecca listened without interrupting. She knew how long it took for a grief to unclench enough for someone to speak of it. Elias continued. "After she died, I learned how much silence could hurt. But I also learned it could protect a man when he wasn't ready to open his wounds." He exhaled slowly. In the last year or so, the ranch began to feel too empty, too quiet. I realized I wasn't healing. I was hiding. "Everyone hides," Rebecca murmured. "The important thing is knowing when to stop." He turned to her fully. Yesterday felt like a turning. A soft pulse moved beneath her ribs. She searched for the right words. "I don't know where this might lead, Elias, but I do know I don't want to walk backward anymore." His eyes softened with something like gratitude. "Then let's not." A gust of wind drifted past them, carrying the scent of pine sap and distant earth. The valley felt wider somehow, as though their conversation had carved new space between the mountains. Elias gestured toward the trail leading north. "Would you like to see the creek? It's not far. About half a mile." Rebecca smiled faintly. "Yes, I'd like that." They set off again, the path narrowing as they moved beyond the last of the town. Birds perched along the fence posts, calling to one another in short melodic bursts. Rebecca found herself relaxing, letting her breath match the rhythm of their steps. Elias walked with an attentive patience, as though adjusting his pace to hers. She noticed it and felt an unexpected warmth settle beneath her collarbone. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly after several minutes. Rebecca touched the brim of her bonnet lightly, considering. "I'm thinking how strange it feels to walk beside someone again. I had forgotten how two footsteps can feel like one sound." He absorbed that gently. "Strange isn't always bad." "No," she admitted. "Sometimes it's hope in disguise." They reached the creek shortly after. Sunlight shimmered across the moving water, catching fragments of gold beneath its surface. The sound of the current was soft and constant. Elias guided her toward a flat stone where they could sit. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply sat in the warmth of afternoon, letting the quiet settle naturally. Rebecca broke the silence this time. "Elias, what is it you're truly looking for?" "Not in a general sense. In me." He didn't hesitate. "Truth? And someone who won't turn away when I have nothing but my silence to offer." He paused. "Someone who carries her strength quietly, but fiercely." She turned her eyes to the water. A faint ache spread through her chest, but not in the old familiar way. This ache was different, softer, braver. "And what do you see in me?" she asked. "I see a woman whose quiet isn't emptiness." He said, "It's depth." Her breath faltered. Just a little, enough to feel alive. When they walked back toward town later, the valley felt different around them, as though the world had shifted by a degree. Not much, but enough to matter. By the time they reached the porch of the boarding house, both understood something unspoken. Something had begun. The next morning arrived with a sky washed in pale gold, the kind of light that slipped softly across the rooftops of Cedar Valley. Rebecca Hale stepped out onto the porch of the boarding house, pulling her shawl closer to her shoulders. The air still carried a lingering coolness, though the day promised warmth. She stood there for a moment, taking in the way the sun brushed against the distant hills. Something inside her had begun to loosen, as though the valley itself was granting her permission to breathe differently. She did not wait long. The steady sound of hoofbeats approached from the eastern road, unhurried but purposeful. Elias Ward appeared through the morning haze, sitting tall in the saddle, his posture shaped by years of work rather than pride. He guided his horse toward the porch, dismounting before she had fully stepped down the stairs. "Good morning, Miss Hale?" He greeted, his voice carrying the quiet strength of early hours. "Good morning," she replied. "You're earlier than I expected." He adjusted his hat slightly. "The ranch work called me before dawn, so I figured I'd call on you on my way back." There was something gentle in his tone, something that felt almost tentative despite his sturdy frame. Rebecca folded her hands, her heart tapping faster than usual. "And what is your plan for today if you're willing?" Elias said. "I'd like to take you to the ranch, show you the place, the land. It's a part of me. Hard to know a man without knowing what he works for." She hesitated only for a brief moment. Visiting a man's ranch meant stepping into his life more closely than a walk through town. It meant seeing the weight he carried, the world he lived in. It meant letting him see her in a setting without the buffers of streets or curious gazes. "I would like that," she said softly. His eyes warmed with something she couldn't quite name. Gratitude. Perhaps relief. Maybe. Or the quiet recognition that she had chosen to accept the step he offered. He helped her onto the horse he had brought for her, a gentle roan mare whose calm eyes eased her instinctive tension. They rode side by side out of town, the buildings giving way to open valley, then to long stretches of grassland. The road widened into a rugged path where wagon wheels had carved faint grooves over years of travel. For a while, neither spoke. The rhythm of hooves and the steady breath of the animals filled the silence with a peaceful cadence. The land around them opened wide, dotted with sage and low brush. Hawks circled above the distant ridgeline, their cries echoing faintly through the morning air. Rebecca inhaled the earthy scent of the plains. The dry sweetness of sun-warmed grass carried on a gentle breeze. It felt grounding, like stepping into a world older and steadier than her uncertainty. Finally, Elias spoke. "When I first came to Cedar Valley, this land was nothing but dust and broken soil. I worked it with my own hands for years before it gave anything back." She glanced at him, watching the thoughtful line of his jaw. It must have taken relentless strength. Stubbornness, more than anything. He answered with a faint smile. "Strength comes later. At first, it's just a man refusing to quit." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I understand that." He looked at her then. Really looked. And she realized he knew exactly what she meant without her explaining. That understanding wrapped itself around her with a quiet tenderness she wasn't prepared for. They continued until a weathered gate came into view. Oak posts framed the entrance, with a hand-carved sign bearing the name Ward Ranch. The fencing stretched outward in both directions, marking the boundaries of a land shaped by labor, loss, and the determination of one man. Elias dismounted to open the gate, his movements smooth and practiced. Rebecca watched the way he lifted the heavy wooden latch, the simple act revealing years of familiarity. When he climbed back into the saddle, and he caught her gaze. "Welcome," he said. "This is home." As they entered the ranch grounds, Rebecca felt the subtle shift in the air. The land carried echoes of the people who had walked it before, the laughter and sorrow embedded in the dust. There were barns in the distance, fences running across pastures, and a few cattle grazing lazily. Smoke drifted faintly from a chimney, suggesting someone inside preparing a morning meal. A man stepped out from one of the barns, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was older, his shoulders broad despite the gray streaking his hair. When he saw Elias and Rebecca approach, he nodded respectfully. "Morning. Boss?" He called. "You're back earlier than expected. This is Miss Hale." Elias introduced, "I'd like her to see the ranch." The man tipped his hat toward her. "Ma'am, I'm Joseph. Been working this ranch with Mr. Ward near 15 years now." Rebecca smiled. "It's good to meet you." Joseph's eyes held something warm and understanding. "Boss doesn't bring many folks out this way. You must be someone important. Rebecca felt her breath catch. Elias shot the man a look that wasn't harsh but carried an unspoken message. Joseph raised both hands slightly in surrender. I'll leave you two to it, he said, heading back toward the barn with an easy stride. Elias shook his head with mild amusement. Joseph talks more than he works some days, but he's loyal as they come. It seems he respects you a great deal, Rebecca said. He knew me before I knew how to run a ranch. Elias replied, respect earned that way means something different. They rode deeper onto the property, the house coming into view. It was sturdy, built of worn timber, with a deep front porch shaded by a wide roofline. The windows glimmered softly in the morning sun. It looked weathered. Yes, but lived in. Loved. Even. A flicker of emotion touched Elias's face when he saw the house. A shadow of memory. A quiet sadness that passed like a cloud across the sun. This place holds a lot, he said, his voice nearly a whisper. Some of it I've carried alone for too long. Rebecca felt the tenderness of his confession, delicate and cautious. She guided her mare closer, her tone equally gentle. You don't have to share anything before you're ready. I know, he said. That's why I can. Her breath softened in her chest. As they approached the steps, the screen door creaked open. A middle-aged woman wearing a worn apron stepped out, wiping her hands. Mr. Ward, she called with a warm familiarity. Wasn't expecting you back this soon? Breakfast is nearly ready. Thank you. Nora, Elias replied. This is Miss Hale. She's visiting the ranch today. Nora looked Rebecca over with a discerning but kind gaze. Well, now, about time this house had a bit of new company. We haven't had a lady visit in a while? Rebecca offered a small nod. It's a lovely place. Nora smiled knowingly. It's honest. That's what it is. Elias motioned toward the fields. There's something I'd like to show you before breakfast. Rebecca followed him down a narrow trail behind the house. They walked on foot now, the horses grazing nearby. The land unfolded behind the property, opening into a quiet meadow bordered by cottonwoods. And there, just beyond the shade, was a small wooden marker, simple, weathered, tender. Elias stopped, his breath steady but heavy. Rebecca, this is where Caroline rests. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. She walked beside him, her voice nothing more than a soft wind. Thank you for bringing me here. It felt important, he said quietly. I wanted you to know the truth of my life. She nodded, resting her hand lightly on the rail of the small fence surrounding the grave. I honor this part of your story. Her words settled over him like a warm blanket. Not intrusive, not demanding. Simply present. He looked at her then. The silence between them filled with something deep and quiet and brave. Rebecca, he said softly. I feel something beginning here, something I haven't let myself feel in years. She met his gaze steadily. So do I. They stood together beside the resting place of his past, letting the morning light wash gently over them, carrying the quiet promise of whatever might come next. The walk back from the small wooden marker was unhurried, each step shaped by the weight of what had just passed between them. Morning light filtered through the cottonwoods, stretching soft shadows across the ground. The breeze moved around them as though careful not to disturb the stillness in their thoughts. Rebecca Hale felt the quiet around them settling into her bones, a quiet that didn't frighten her the way some silences once had. This one held understanding, respect, the beginnings of something neither dared name aloud. Elias Ward walked slightly behind her, giving her space yet staying near enough that she felt his presence like a steady warmth at her back. It was not protective in the sense of shielding. It was protective in the sense of standing with her. And she realized, with a subtle ache, that she had not felt accompanied in that way for years. When they reached the house again, Nora stepped onto the porch with a dish towel in hand. Breakfast is ready if you two are hungry, she called, her voice tinged with the warmth of someone who rarely felt surprised but welcomed what she saw. Elias glanced at Rebecca. Would you care to eat with us? It's simple food, but it's honest. Rebecca nodded. I'd like that. Inside, the kitchen smelled of warm biscuits and coffee strong enough to stir even the most tired ranch hand awake. The wooden table bore scratches and faded marks from years of use, each one telling a story of mornings shared, evenings spent, storms waited out. Rebecca slipped into a chair across from Elias, and Nora placed a plate before each of them. They ate quietly, the kind of quiet that felt companionable. Elias spoke only when necessary, his words thoughtful, never filling the air just for the sake of sound. Rebecca appreciated that more than he knew. After a few minutes, Nora excused herself to handle chores, leaving them alone at the table. Elias reached for his coffee, pausing before he took a sip, his eyes lifting to meet hers. I hope bringing you here wasn't too much, he said softly. I know visiting the ranch, meeting Joseph, seeing the resting place, it's a lot. Rebecca folded her hands loosely on the table as it was honest. I'd rather see the truth of someone's life than only the parts they polish for the world. His breath eased at her words, a subtle release of tension. You speak like someone who has had to hide her truth to be accepted, he said. She looked down briefly, then back up. Perhaps, or maybe like someone who learned that truth is the only thing that survives grief. A long silence followed. Not heavy, not uneasy, just deep. He touched the rim of his coffee cup with his thumb, tracing the smooth curve. I want you to know something. Rebecca. After Caroline passed, I shut most of myself away. Folks saw me working the ranch, fixing fences, riding the land, but they didn't see how empty I felt inside. I walked through days like a ghost. I thought that was just how life would be from then on. Rebecca listened with the attentive stillness of someone who understood loss as a language in itself. Elias continued, but yesterday, walking with you, today, bringing you here, it felt like the first time the world looked different, like something inside me had taken its first breath in years. Something warm and aching stirred at the base of her throat. She clasped her hands a little tighter. Elias, do not mistake gentleness for love. Do not mistake company for healing. I'm not, he replied quietly. I know the difference. Truly, I do. I'm only saying that you being here changes the way my days feel. That matters, even if neither of us knows where it leads. His honesty disarmed her. It slipped past the defenses she had spent years building, and she wasn't sure whether she should be grateful or afraid. She looked toward the window, where the sunlight fell thick and golden across the yard. When I lost my father, I felt like part of my voice went with him. He was the only one who understood the quiet in me. After he passed, I started filling the silence with work, tasks, duties, anything that made me useful enough to be tolerated. Tolerated, he repeated softly, the word tasting bitter on his tongue. You deserve more than that. Rebecca? Her eyes returned to his. Perhaps, but wanting more feels dangerous. Maybe it is, he said. But so is standing still. The tremor that touched her breath was small but real. Elias rose then, picking up the empty plates and setting them gently into the wash basin. When he returned to the table, he leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering into something warm and grounded. Would you like to see the northern pasture? It's quieter than the rest of the ranch. You can hear the creek from there. It might be a good place to walk. She nodded. Yes, I'd like that. They stepped back outside into the light. The air had warmed, though a soft breeze still threaded through the valley. Elias led her along a narrow path that curved behind the barn, past the paddock, and toward open fields. The grasses grew taller here, brushing lightly against their boots. The sound of the distant creek whispered through the trees. Rebecca breathed deeper than she had in years. When they reached the edge of the pasture, Elias stopped beside an old fence. resting his hand on the sun-worn rail. I come here when the world feels too loud, he said. Even the land has its quiet places. She stepped beside him, absorbing the stillness around them. A hawk passed overhead, its shadow gliding across the ground like a fleeting memory. I understand why you come here, she murmured. He looked at her, his expression steady and unguarded. I wanted you to see this because I want you to know the parts of me I don't show the world. The parts that are still learning how to live again. Rebecca's heartbeat tapped a slow rhythm beneath her ribs. And what is it you want from me? Elias. His answer was gentle, spoken without rush, not promises, not certainty, just your presence, your honesty, and the chance to see where this path leads, one step at a time. She stared at the open land before them. Her mind wrestled quietly with doubt, with longing, with a fragile hope that had begun to stir despite her better judgment. At last she spoke. I can offer that. Slowly, cautiously, but sincerely. A soft breath left him, almost like relief. They stood together in that quiet space, the land holding them with its wide stillness. And for the first time in years, Rebecca felt something shift inside her. Not a breaking, not a closing, a gentle opening. Small but real. The afternoon sunlight drifted lazily across the northern pasture, softening every outline and giving the world a hazy glow that made time feel slower somehow. Rebecca Hale walked beside Elias Ward along a narrow trail that wound toward a patch of cottonwoods. Neither of them hurried. The air held a faint chill, the kind that hinted at seasons shifting beneath the surface. Elias stopped every few minutes to point out something small. A patch of sage that grew despite last winter's storms. A hawk's nest high in a dying pine. A stretch of grass flattened in a circular pattern where deer had bedded down the previous night. Rebecca found herself listening more to the tone of his voice than the facts he shared. It held a steadiness she hadn't realized she missed in her life until now. A quiet strength, shaped by years of weathering both land and loss. You walk like someone who knows where she's going, Elias said softly as they stepped beneath the shade of the cottonwoods. Rebecca offered a faint smile. I walk like someone who's afraid to stand still for too long. He studied her a moment, his gaze gentle. Is stillness something you fear I fear what it reveals? She admitted. Silence lets old thoughts rise. Most days I prefer to be useful instead. Elias leaned lightly against a cottonwood trunk. Being still doesn't mean being idle. Sometimes it's the only way we learn who we've become. His words settled around her, stirring something quiet and vulnerable. She turned away for a moment, letting her eyes travel across the land. The northern pasture stretched wide, dotted with patches of wildflowers pushing stubbornly through dry soil. A creek meandered nearby, glinting under the sun. Everything felt honest here. Nothing polished or forced. Rebecca lowered herself onto a fallen log, brushing pine needles aside. Elias sat opposite her, resting his elbows on his knees. The breeze curled softly between them. Earlier, he said, voice low, when I told you that you brought something new into my days, I meant it. She swallowed, her throat tightening. New isn't always good. Elias, sometimes it leads to disappointment. Do you think that's where we're heading? She shook her head. I don't know. That's what frightens me. He nodded, accepting the truth without pressing her further. She appreciated that about him. He didn't try to fix her fears, he simply made room for them. A long moment passed before he spoke again. Rebecca, I'm not asking you to step into anything quickly. I wouldn't want you to. I've lived enough years to know that trust grows slow, like these cottonwoods. Their roots take hold long before the branches show it. Rebecca let her gaze drift upward through the tangled canopy. And what if the roots never take? What if the ground isn't good enough? Elias considered her question carefully. Then the tree doesn't grow. But that's not a failure. It's simply a truth. Life doesn't always give us the answers we want, but it gives us chances. That's all either of us can ask for. His calmness eased a tight place inside her chest. Out here? Under these trees. The fears she carried felt lighter, not gone, but no longer crushing. A quiet rustling broke the moment. A cluster of mule deer stepped into view across the pasture, their ears flicking at the wind. Rebecca held her breath as they grazed, serene and unbothered by the two figures watching from beneath the cottonwoods. They always come here in the afternoons, Elias whispered. Joseph used to say it meant the land trusted him. Rebecca felt a soft ache at the mention of the old ranch hand. She had only met him briefly, yet his presence lingered in Elias's stories and in the land itself. You cared for him, she said gently. I did, Elias replied. He was the kind of man who didn't need many words to make his mark. He taught me to listen to what isn't spoken. Rebecca folded her hands in her lap. My father was that way too. He'd sit by the window in the evenings, watching the sun go down. Some neighbors thought he was lonely. I knew he was thinking, feeling, quietly carrying things he didn't want to burden others with. Elias tilted his head slightly. You learned that from him. Carrying things alone, a flicker of pain shaped her reply. Perhaps too well. He leaned closer, not touching her, just bridging the space with intent. You don't have to carry everything by yourself anymore. The words struck deep, tender and frightening all at once. She felt her breath catch, her pulse steady yet unsteady beneath it. Why me? Elias. Her voice trembled almost imperceptibly. You could have chosen any woman on that platform. Younger, brighter, with dreams that haven't dimmed. He took a long breath before answering. When I rode into town that morning, I wasn't looking for brightness. I was looking for truth. I saw 20 women who wanted to be chosen. And then I saw one woman who stood like she had survived more endings than beginnings, yet still had enough courage left to show up. His gaze softened. You stood quiet, but not defeated. That mattered to me. Her eyes stung and she looked away, blinking quickly. He continued gently. We all break. Rebecca, some of us just learn to mend ourselves without showing the seams. When I saw you that day, I recognized someone who understood that kind of mending. She drew in a slow breath, holding it as though unsure what to do with his words. I'm not easy to know, she said quietly. I keep things locked away, even from myself. I won't push you, he replied, but I'm here. When you're ready. Something inside her shifted then, a subtle loosening, like the first give of a knot pulled too tight for too long. From the distance, the sound of Nora calling cut through the quiet air. Elias turned his head. I imagine she wants help with supper. Rebecca stood slowly, smoothing her skirt. We should head back. They walked side by side, their shadows falling long across the pasture. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The silence between them had changed. It no longer felt like empty space. It felt like space waiting to be filled. Near the barn. Elias stopped and faced her. Rebecca, would you be willing to join us for supper? Nora would enjoy the company. And he paused, choosing his next words carefully. So would I. Rebecca's heart fluttered with something fragile and warm, something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Yes, she said softly. I'll stay. A quiet smile touched his mouth. Good. The light was fading as they stepped toward the house, the horizon glowing the soft amber of early evening. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt herself walking toward something instead of away from it. And deep inside, she felt a whisper of possibility stirring awake. The walk back to the ranch house settled something quiet inside Rebecca, though she would not have been able to name it. Evening light draped itself gently across Cedar Valley as if the land were preparing to rest. The faint smell of supper drifted from the open kitchen window, carried by a soft wind that moved through the cottonwoods with a whispering sound that reminded her of pages turning. Nora greeted them with a knowing look but said nothing. She simply motioned toward the basin for washing hands, as though inviting Rebecca had always been part of the day's plan. Elias lingered near the doorway, watching Rebecca with a glance that was steady yet respectful, offering space without withdrawing from her presence. It was a balancing act she found remarkable. The meal was simple. Stew simmered long enough that the vegetables had softened, their flavors melding in a comforting warmth. Fresh bread rested beside a small bowl of butter, its surface slightly uneven from Nora's careful shaping. The three of them sat together in an unhurried rhythm, spoons tapping softly against bowls in a pattern both familiar and soothing. Rebecca found herself speaking more than she expected, sharing small memories from her upbringing, stories of her father and the quiet evenings they once shared. Elias listened with the patience of someone who had spent enough years alone to value every offered truth. Nora occasionally added a gentle comment, but mostly she watched them with a kind of quiet satisfaction, as though seeing a seed take root. After supper, Elias walked Rebecca toward the barn before she rode back to town. The dusk painted the sky in muted pinks and lavender, and the first stars blinked awake. The world felt tender in its stillness. "Thank you for today," she said softly, hands clasped before her. "It was more peaceful than I expected." Elias nodded, his voice quiet. "Peace is something we all deserve, even if it takes time to trust it." Her breath caught slightly. "Trust is slow for me." "I know," he replied, "and I won't rush you." They stood without speaking for a moment, letting the sounds of the ranch settle between them. A horse shifted inside the barn. Crickets began their evening chorus. The land exhaled. Rebecca mounted her horse with practiced ease. Elias stepped back, giving her room, but he didn't leave. But he watched until she disappeared down the path toward town, his silhouette outlined by the last thinning light. The next morning, the whispers began. Rebecca felt them the moment she stepped into the general store in Cedar Valley. Heads turned just a little too quickly. Conversations faltered. Eyes lingered in ways they hadn't before. She kept her posture straight, her breath measured. She'd endured worse stares in her life, but the weight of them was impossible to ignore. Mrs. Callum, the storekeeper's wife, approached her with a bright, overly curious smile. "Rough road out toward ranch, isn't it? Must have been quite a visit if you were willing to make that ride." Rebecca offered a polite smile. It wasn't difficult. A few townsfolk paused in their browsing to listen. Mrs. Callum leaned in slightly. "Folks saw you two walking together yesterday, and then again this morning when you rode out early. People talk, you know." "You..." Rebecca kept her expression calm, even as heat crept beneath her skin. "People often talk when they have little else to do." There was a shift in the room. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else stared shamelessly. Mrs. Callum opened her mouth to pry further, but Rebecca turned toward the counter, her tone gentle yet firm. "I'm only here for flour, coffee, and lamp oil today." For a moment, the room froze. Then the storekeeper hurried to fill her order, his hands moving more quickly than necessary. When she collected her things and stepped outside, she released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had barely placed her purchases in the saddlebag when footsteps approached behind her. "Miss Hale..." The voice belonged to Sheriff Dalton, a man built broad through years of ranch work before taking on the badge. His tone, usually warm, held a hint of hesitation. "Morning, Sheriff," she said, tightening the strap on her bag. "I mean no offense, but folks are wondering about you and Elias Ward." Rebecca straightened slowly. "In what way?" Well, he rubbed his jaw, glancing back toward the storefront windows where nosy eyes peered out. "Elias hasn't shown interest in anyone since Caroline passed. People are surprised. Curious." "Curious," Rebecca repeated quietly, tasting the sting beneath the word. The sheriff shifted his weight. "People here aren't cruel, but they notice things. You being an outsider, and Elias being who he is, it's bound to stir talk." She nodded once, keeping her voice steady. "I understand." Just be prepared. Cedar Valley has long memories and louder opinions than most towns. Opinions aren't facts, Rebecca replied gently. The sheriff chuckled lightly. No, but they sure travel faster. He tipped his hat and left her with that truth. Rebecca mounted her horse and rode out of town, the air crisp against her cheeks. Though she held her posture high, her thoughts churned. The whispers were nothing new in her life, but the way they linked her to Elias unsettled her. Not because she feared the connection, but because she feared what the attention might mean for him. When she reached the ranch, Elias was near the corral, tightening a rope. He glanced up as she approached, his expression softening. You look troubled, he said quietly. She dismounted, brushing dust from her skirt. The town has been busy this morning. He gave a knowing nod. They've started talking. They have... He tossed the rope aside and faced her fully. Rebecca, I don't care what they say, I know, she replied. But they might care? And that concerns me. Elias stepped closer, his voice calm but resolute. This is my life, my land, my choices. I won't let the town decide them for me. Her breath wavered, the sincerity in his words striking deeper than she expected. But I don't want to make things harder for you, she whispered. You're not, he answered. You're doing the opposite. The wind picked up, lifting a strand of hair across her cheek. He reached out as though to brush it away but hesitated, letting his hand drop gently instead. Rebecca, come walk with me, he said. She nodded. They walked toward the open field, letting the land hold their silence. There was a steadiness in Elias's stride that reassured her, even as her emotions tangled in quiet knots. When they reached the hill overlooking the valley, he spoke again. Let them talk. What matters is what happens here between us, not in the mouths of people who don't know our hearts. For the first time since leaving town, she felt the pressure ease. Elias looked at her, eyes steady as the horizon. We'll face them together, if you choose this. Her reply came softly, but with growing certainty. I'm not walking away. The breeze carried the quiet promise between them, settling gently into the land. The rest of the afternoon carried a fragile calm, the kind that felt borrowed rather than owned. Rebecca rode beside Elias as he led her toward the workshop behind the barn, a place she had not yet seen. The structure stood slightly apart from the other buildings, its walls darkened from weather and years of use. When he opened the door, a warm smell of freshly cut timber slipped into the air. Inside, the workshop was quiet in its own way, filled with tools arranged on shelves that reflected a life lived through hands and labor. Smooth planks leaned against the back wall. A half-finished table rested on sawhorses, its edges still rough. Dust dancing in the afternoon light turned the workshop into something soft, almost sacred. Elias moved toward a small cabinet in the corner and opened it with thoughtful care. He returned holding a wooden box that looked old, yet tended to with devotion. I want to show you something, he said, placing it gently on the workbench. Rebecca watched as he lifted the lid. Inside lay folded letters, yellowed with age, tied together by a thin piece of worn ribbon. Beneath them was a small locket, tarnished but carried with meaning. These belong to Caroline, he said quietly. I haven't shown them to anyone in years. Rebecca felt her breath tighten. Elias, are you sure? He nodded. If I'm asking you to walk a path with me, even just step by step, I want you to know the truth of where I've been. He picked up the locket first, holding it as though it were fragile despite its sturdy metal. She wore this every day. Inside is a picture her sister sent her the year before she passed. I couldn't bring myself to move it after she died. I still come in here sometimes, holding it, remembering the life we shared. Rebecca listened with her hands folded lightly before her. His voice held the softness of someone opening a door long kept closed. Elias set the locket down and touched the letters next. She wrote to me during the long winter the year before she died. These are the only pieces of her voice I have left. He placed the letters back in the box with deliberate tenderness, then closed the lid. When he looked up at Rebecca, there was no apology in his eyes, only honesty. I won't pretend that the past disappears, he said. It shapes us. It shaped me. But I want you to understand that knowing you doesn't replace her. It's something different, something new. Rebecca's chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't immediately name. She stepped closer to the bench, her fingers brushing lightly over the smooth wooden lid of the box. Thank you, she whispered, for trusting me with this. I want to, he said simply. The weight of that truth settled between them like a warm blanket. But almost as quickly as it brought comfort, a flicker of doubt rose from deep within her. What if I'm not ready? The question escaped before she could guard against it. What if I'm not meant for this kind of life? Elias's expression softened. Then we take our time. I'm not asking for an answer today. But the town, they talk as though we've already made decisions I'm still learning to understand. He stepped beside her, leaving only a small space between them. People will always create their own stories. What matters is the one we choose to live. Rebecca looked toward the open doorway, where sunlight spilled across the barnyard. Something inside her wavered, part hope, part fear. I'm afraid of disappointing you, she admitted. You won't, he said gently. You don't know that. I don't need to, he replied. What I know is that whatever we build will be honest, and honesty doesn't disappoint. His words were steady, warm. They settled into her like ground she might someday trust enough to stand on. But still, something inside her tugged. Elias, what if the town doesn't accept me? What if they never do? He studied her for a long moment. Then I'll stand with you until they learn. Or until it no longer matters. The way he said it, calm, unwavering, sent a trembling warmth through her chest. It was the kind of reassurance she had once believed came only from dreams. Yet doubt, persistent and familiar, continued its quiet stir in her mind. She turned away, moving toward the doorway to gather her breath. Outside, the ranch spread wide under a sky brushed with late afternoon gold. The land felt honest in its vastness, but the world beyond it still held judgments sharp enough to wound. When Elias approached her, he stopped at a respectful distance. Rebecca, he said softly, walk with me. She nodded. They followed a narrow path that curved behind the workshop and led toward an open clearing where wild grass grew tall. The breeze combed through the field, creating soft waves that shimmered in the sun. Rebecca lifted her hand to touch one of the tall blades, letting it slip through her fingers. This place feels like it belongs to another life, she murmured. Sometimes it feels that way for me too, he said. After Caroline passed, every day felt like borrowed time. Rebecca turned toward him. Is that why you chose someone like me? Someone who knows loneliness? He paused, considering her question with the seriousness it deserved. I chose you because you stood with strength even when the world refused to see it. Not because you were lonely, but because you were real. Her heart tightened. A quiet ache moved through her. I'm not used to being seen, she whispered. I know, he said, and I'm not asking you to be anything more than you already are. The wind brushed between them, cool and steady. For a moment, neither spoke. The land filled the silence with its quiet breathing. When Rebecca finally found her voice again, it trembled with honesty. I want to trust this. Trust you. But part of me still fears I'll lose myself again. You won't, Elias replied. Not here. Not with me. I won't let your voice disappear. Her eyes glistened, the emotion too full to contain. And what about you, she asked softly. What if opening your heart again brings pain? You're not ready for? His breath deepened. Pain might come. It always does. But so does joy. And I'm choosing to step toward what might heal, not what might hurt. His words struck her like a gentle truth she hadn't realized she needed. The wind softened, as though the valley itself was listening. They walked back toward the ranch house slowly, not speaking. letting the land hold the silence for them. When they reached the porch, Elias turned toward her. "I'd like to see you again tomorrow," he said. "Only if you want to." Rebecca looked up at him, her voice soft but certain. "I'll be here." A quiet warmth moved through his expression, steady, unforced. When she rode back toward town, doubt still trailed her, but for the first time, hope walked beside it. Night settled over Cedar Valley in a slow sweep of darkness, the kind that felt ancient and watchful. Rebecca rode home beneath a sky crowded with stars, each one flickering like a quiet reminder that the world held more secrets than any single heart could carry. The trail ahead of her was faintly lit by the moon, but her thoughts made the path feel longer than usual. By the time she reached her small home at the edge of town, exhaustion had folded into her bones. She lit a lamp, set her shawl across the chair, and washed the dust from her face. Yet even after preparing for sleep, she remained awake, her mind circling the moments of the day like an animal pacing the same worn ground. Elias showing her Caroline's letters, the way he looked at her with a gentleness that seemed to understand every quiet part of her. The whispers in town, the sheriff's warning, her own fears breathing at the edges of every step forward. When she finally drifted into sleep, it was restless. Hours later, she woke with a start. Something had stirred outside, and at first she thought it was wind, or perhaps her dreams tugging her back. But then she heard it again. A faint scraping sound. A shadow moving beyond her window. Her pulse quickened. She rose slowly from the bed, feet touching the wooden floor with careful silence. Moving toward the window, she pushed the curtain aside just enough to catch a glimpse of the street. A figure, standing in the middle of the road, still, watching her house. The lamp behind her flickered with a soft pop, throwing the room into a dimmer glow. Rebecca held her breath. The figure stepped closer. She recognized the coat first, old, dust-stained, the shoulders too broad to belong to anyone she knew in town. Her heart lodged painfully in her throat as the figure approached the edge of her yard. A man's voice carried through the cold night air, low and roughened by travel. "Rebecca." Her entire body froze. No, it couldn't be. But when he stepped into the moonlight, the truth struck her hard enough that her knees weakened. Joseph, the man she once called husband, the man who left her with nothing but silence and a bruised soul, the man everyone believed dead in a winter storm 3 years ago. He was alive, and he had found her. Her breath trembled as she opened the door, stepping onto the porch with a mixture of shock and dread. The night seemed to tighten around them. "Rebecca," Joseph repeated, his voice hoarse. "You're a hard woman to track." She couldn't speak, couldn't form any shape of sense around the storm building inside her. He took another step forward, stopping just short of the porch. "You look well," he said quietly, almost gently. Yet she recognized the dangerous softness in his tone. "How are you alive?" she finally whispered. "A man can survive a lot when he's stubborn enough." Joseph replied, "Snowstorm didn't take me. Took everything I had on me, but not my life. Woke up in a trapper's cabin 2 days later. Took months to walk again. Longer to get my bearings. When I finally made it back," his eyes hardened. "You were gone. Everyone thought you died," she murmured. "Did you?" he asked, voice cutting through her like a blade of frost. "Did you think I was dead, Rebecca? Or did you just want to believe it?" She felt the old wounds rise, sharp and familiar. The years with him had been filled with moments she tried to bury. Moments of raised voices, moments of isolation, moments of quiet suffering hidden beneath a marriage people in town thought was steady. "I left because I had to," she said, her voice low but steady. Joseph stepped onto the first stair of the porch. "You were my wife. I was your prisoner," she replied, barely above a whisper. "And you know it." He flinched, the truth hitting him like a blow. But his face darkened with something she remembered too well. "I came back for you," he said. "I walked across half the country to find you. You shouldn't have—" His expression tightened. You belong with me. No, she said softly, firmly. I don't. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy as iron. Then Joseph took another step up the porch. His presence seemed to swallow the space around her. Is there someone else, he asked, his voice dropping into a tone that felt like a threat disguised as curiosity. Rebecca felt her breath stutter. Elias's face flashed in her mind. The way he listened. The way he walked beside her. The way he offered gentleness without demand. That's not your concern, she said quietly. So there is, Joseph growled, jaw tightening. She straightened, grounding herself in a strength she had slowly rebuilt through her time in Cedar Valley. I'm not the woman you left behind, she said. I won't return to the life I escaped. Joseph stared at her for a long, charged moment. The fury in him simmered like a pot close to boiling. But he held it back. We'll talk tomorrow, he said. You owe me that much. I owe you nothing, she answered. He stepped back, his boots crunching softly against the dirt road. His shadow stretched long as he walked away, disappearing into the darkness as quietly as he had come. Rebecca remained on the porch long after he vanished. The night pressed against her skin. Her breath trembled. Her thoughts spiraled in painful circles. Joseph was alive, and he would not let her go easily. Slowly she sank onto the wooden step, pressing her hands together to keep them from shaking. Every piece of progress she thought she had made suddenly felt fragile. Every step forward with Elias felt threatened. You won't lose yourself. Elias had promised earlier that day. She closed her eyes, letting his words settle into the fear. She didn't know how the town would react. Didn't know what Joseph wanted beyond control. Didn't know how Elias would respond to this sudden upheaval. But she knew she couldn't hide from any of it. When she finally rose and went back inside, she bolted the door and set her lamp low. The night no longer felt peaceful. It felt like a warning. Still, beneath her fear, something else stirred. A strength she thought she had lost. A quiet resolve. Joseph's return would not undo her life, and she would not return to the woman she once was. Morning came too quickly. Rebecca barely slept. Each time she drifted close to rest, the memory of Joseph standing under the moonlight dragged her back awake. The house felt colder than usual, as if the night had left its breath on the walls. She moved quietly through her small kitchen, hands trembling slightly as she lit the stove and filled the kettle. The steam rising from the tin pot calmed her only a little. By the time she stepped outside, the sun had begun to wash Cedar Valley in soft gold. The town looked unchanged, but her world had shifted in a way that felt irreversible. She walked toward the stable to prepare her horse, each step deliberate. She needed to see Elias, needed to tell him before the news came from someone else. But as she saddled her horse, she sensed someone watching her. Turning sharply, she found Mrs. Callum standing near the gate, arms folded and eyes bright with curiosity sharpened to a point. The older woman's expression held no warmth. You were up late, she said without greeting. Rebecca steadied her breath. Is there something you need? Mrs. Callum, I heard someone outside your house last night. The woman's chin lifted slightly. A man. Rebecca stiffened. It was private business. Mrs. Callum's eyebrows rose in a slow, cutting arc. Private? In a town this size, folks won't see it that way. Especially not with you visiting Elias Ward every other day. Rebecca tightened the saddle, jaw clenching. I'm not obligated to explain my life to you. The woman's lips pressed together. Suit yourself. But the sheriff will want to know if a stranger's wandering the streets after dark. With that, she turned and walked off, leaving Rebecca with a cold wave of dread. The news would spread by noon. Her past, the one she had fought so hard to bury, would soon be the talk of Cedar Valley. She mounted her horse and rode toward Ward Ranch, her heartbeat keeping an uneven rhythm beneath her ribs. The land outside town opened into wide stretches of golden grass. The horizon felt farther away than usual, the air heavier. When she reached the ranch, she found Elias repairing a fence near the creek. He looked up at the sound of approaching hooves, and the warmth that touched his eyes made her chest ache with something tender and painful all at once. "You came early," he said, brushing dirt from his hands. "I had to," she replied, dismounting quickly. He stepped toward her, sensing the weight she carried. "Something happened." "Yes," her voice cracked slightly. "Elias, someone from my past has returned." His expression changed instantly, not in fear, but in a deep, steady alertness. "Tell me," he said. Rebecca swallowed, feeling the truth tremble inside her. "Joseph, my husband. The one everyone thought died." Elias stood still, absorbing her words. His breath deepened once, but he did not look away. "You told me he was gone." "I believed he was," she whispered. "He appeared outside my house last night. I didn't know what to do." A long silence stretched between them, not empty but full of shifting emotions neither of them fully understood yet. Elias walked slowly to her side, his presence grounding. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly, but he made it clear he expects me to return to him." Her voice shook. "And he suspects there's someone else." Elias's jaw tightened just enough to show the storm gathering beneath his calm. "Rebecca," he said gently, "you don't owe him your life." "I know. But the town, they'll talk even more now." "They already talk," he replied softly, "and that never stopped me from choosing what feels right." She pressed a hand to her forehead. "I'm afraid Joseph will cause trouble. He won't leave quietly. He never accepted losing control." Elias stepped closer, his voice low. "If he tries to harm you, he'll answer to me, and to the law." She looked into his eyes then, finding steadiness she desperately needed. "I didn't want this to fall on you," she said. "You're not a burden," he murmured. "And you don't walk this alone." Her breath wavered. For a moment, she let the comfort of his nearness settle into the fear tightening her chest. "Elias," she whispered, "I'm scared of what he'll do." He reached out, carefully brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Fear means you know the danger. It doesn't mean you're powerless." Something inside her loosened just enough to breathe more easily. He looked past her toward the road. "Has the sheriff seen him?" "No. But Mrs. Callum saw someone outside my house. She'll spread the word. Then we make certain the sheriff hears the truth before the rumors twist it." His tone was calm, but determined. "You'll ride with me. We'll speak to him together." Rebecca hesitated. "That will only fuel the gossip." "Let them gossip," Elias said softly. "My concern is your safety." For a moment, she didn't move. She studied him instead. The quiet strength, the patience, the unwavering steadiness. He wasn't a man who acted for pride or appearance. His decisions came from deeper places, places shaped by loss and rebuilt with careful hope. Finally, she nodded. They rode toward town side by side, their horses moving in unhurried steps. The creek murmured behind them. The breeze shifted the tall grass. The world felt fragile, as though waiting. "How did he find you?" Elias asked after a while. "I'm not sure," she replied. "He said he traveled for months, that he returned home and found me gone. Maybe someone in my old town told him I left. Maybe he followed the smallest trail." Elias watched her with a thoughtful silence. He must have been obsessed to cross that distance. Rebecca shivered. He always struggled with losing anything he believed he owned. "He doesn't own you," Elias said with gentle firmness. "I know," she whispered, "but he won't accept that." Elias slowed his horse slightly, turning to look at her fully. "Rebecca, you have a right to choose your life. You chose to leave him, and you're choosing something different now." Her voice trembled. "But what if this brings trouble to your ranch? To you?" He shook his head. "I faced loss once. I won't run from life now that it's reached out to me again." Her chest tightened at the quiet conviction in his voice. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Not empty silence, but one filled with unspoken understanding and swelling tension. Cedar Valley came into view, small and still under the morning sun, yet Rebecca felt the town watching even before they entered. When they reached the sheriff's office, Sheriff Dalton stepped onto the porch as though he had sensed their approach. "You two here early," he remarked. Rebecca gathered her courage. "Sheriff, I need your help. A man appeared at my house last night. Joseph Hale. He's alive." Dalton stared, stunned. "That's not possible. He was declared dead?" "He's very much alive," Rebecca whispered, "and he wants me back." The sheriff studied her face, then Elias's, reading the gravity in both. "Come inside," Dalton said. "We need to talk." Rebecca followed him, Elias beside her, their shoulders almost touching. For the first time since Joseph's return, she did not feel alone. Sheriff Dalton closed the office door behind them, shutting out the soft morning sounds of Cedar Valley. Inside, the room felt unusually still. A faint scent of pine and paper drifted through the air, mixing with the lingering aroma of the sheriff's early coffee. Rebecca stood near the window, her hands clasped tightly, while Elias remained beside her, close but not crowding. Dalton rubbed a hand over his jaw, his brow furrowed. "Rebecca, I'm going to need you to tell me everything from the beginning. I know it won't be easy." Rebecca breathed slowly, steadying herself. "He came after midnight, stood in the road outside my home. I thought I was dreaming at first, but when he stepped forward, I knew it was him." Dalton's eyes narrowed. "What did he say, that he survived the storm? That he came back and found me gone?" "He believes I should return to him." Her voice trembled slightly. "He thinks I belong to him." The sheriff muttered something under his breath, then leaned back against his desk. "And you're certain it was Joseph Hale?" No mistake, Rebecca's voice softened into something weighed down by years. "There's no mistaking him." Dalton nodded slowly. "I'll need to send a wire to the county office. His death was recorded officially. Someone will need to correct that." "But Rebecca?" He paused, his gaze sharpening. A man who shows up after years missing, demanding what he thinks he lost, can be unpredictable. Elias stood straighter at that, his presence shifting as if readying to shield her without hesitation. "Sheriff," Elias said quietly, "Joseph has a history with her. Not a kind one." Dalton looked between them. "I've heard rumors from your old town, Rebecca. Whispers that things weren't right in your marriage." Rebecca flinched, shame and old fear flickering in her eyes. People didn't see what happened behind closed doors. "You don't need to justify anything," Elias said softly. Dalton nodded in agreement. "No one has the right to judge you for leaving. But the law needs facts. Did he ever harm you physically?" Rebecca hesitated, not because she doubted the truth, but because speaking it aloud reopened wounds she had spent years stitching closed. "Not with fists," she whispered, "but with silence and control and fear. He had a way of taking the air from a room, a way of making me feel like a shadow." She swallowed. "He never let me go anywhere alone. Never let me make decisions without his approval. And when I cried, he said it was weakness." A quiet settled, thick and aching. Dalton let out a heavy breath. Emotional constraint can be just as dangerous as a blow. Maybe more. Elias's hands curled into fists at his sides, though his expression remained calm. Rebecca saw it, and something warm stirred beneath her fear. Dalton reached for a small ledger on his desk. "I can't arrest him for returning, but I can keep a watch on him. If he threatens you verbally or physically, you come to me immediately." "Understand?" Rebecca nodded. "And you," Dalton said, turning to Elias. "Keep close, but not in a way that ignites more trouble." Elias gave a small nod. "I can manage that." Rebecca felt the sheriff's concern like a weight pressing into her ribs. Sheriff, she said quietly, I don't want violence. I just want safety. I want to live a life that isn't chained to fear. And you will, Dalton replied. But Joseph might not like the idea of letting you go. Be cautious, both of you. Rebecca stepped outside into the sunlight, the brightness almost startling after the dimness of the office. She inhaled deeply, but the tightness in her chest didn't fully loosen. Elias walked beside her, hands in his pockets, gaze steady and thoughtful. You were brave in there, he said gently. I don't feel brave, she murmured. Courage doesn't always feel like courage, Elias replied. Sometimes it feels like getting through one moment, then the next. They walked slowly toward the horses, the soft hum of town life building around them. People moved along the wooden walkways, glancing toward her with curious gazes she tried not to meet. The whispers she had feared were beginning already. The rhythm of the town seemed to shift with every step she took. When they reached the hitching post, Rebecca paused before mounting. Elias, she said quietly, there's something else. He turned to her fully. Tell me. When Joseph spoke to me, her voice caught. She steadied herself. For a moment, I felt like the woman I used to be. Small, powerless, lost. She looked down at her hands. I don't want that version of myself to return. Elias stepped closer, not touching her, but offering his presence the way one offers open space and shelter. You're not that woman anymore. You left. You built a new life. That strength most people never find. Her eyes glistened. But the fear is still inside me. Then let me stand with you until it isn't so heavy, he whispered. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly, letting his words seep into the cracks left by the night. When she opened them again, her gaze had softened, but steadied. What if Joseph tries to force me home, she asked quietly. Then he'll learn he can't, Elias said, calm but firm. They mounted their horses and started toward the edge of town. The road stretched long ahead, its dust rising gently under the hooves. Rebecca looked over her shoulder once, half expecting Joseph to appear again from some hidden corner. He wasn't there, but the dread remained. As they rode, Elias matched her pace carefully, letting her guide the rhythm. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of sage from the hills. For a brief moment, she let her eyes close, letting the breeze cool her heated thoughts. At one point, Elias spoke again, voice thoughtful. You didn't deserve what he put you through. Rebecca kept her gaze forward. I stayed longer than I should have. That doesn't make you at fault. She let the silence settle, deep and aching. I believed leaving was the sin, that staying was the duty. My father taught me that when a woman marries, she stays no matter what. Elias looked at her gently. Duty shouldn't drown a person. I know that now, she whispered. But back then, I thought obedience was the only way to be worthy of love. He exhaled slowly. If love requires disappearing, it isn't love. Her throat tightened. Joseph told me last night that he walked across the country for me, that I should be grateful he didn't give up. Elias shook his head. That wasn't devotion. That was possession. Rebecca shivered. I think he believes we can simply step back into who we used to be. He doesn't understand you're not the same. He doesn't understand you found your voice. She looked at Elias, finding strength in the steadiness of his gaze. I want to hold on to that voice, she whispered, even if everything around me tries to silence it. And you will, he said. They reached the fork in the road where their paths split for the day. Rebecca paused, unsure. Elias did too, waiting for her choice. Will you be all right? He asked. She took a slow breath. I hope so. If anything happens, he said, send word. No matter the hour. Rebecca nodded softly. Thank you. As she rode home alone, the shadows along the road seemed to stretch differently. Every rustle in the brush made her spine stiffen. But she kept moving, one breath at a time. She had survived Joseph once. She would not surrender her life to him again. The wind settled into a quiet hush as Rebecca approached her home. Afternoon light stretched across the yard in soft streams, turning the dry grass into a patchwork of gold. Yet even with the beauty around her, an unseen weight pressed firmly between her shoulders. For most people, the silence of Cedar Valley brought comfort. But today, as she dismounted and led her mare toward the small stable behind the house, the stillness carried an edge, a reminder, a memory, a shadow. She hung the reins carefully, her fingers lingering longer than necessary. She told herself she was simply tired, but she knew better. Her heart had been walking a tightrope ever since the night Joseph reappeared. Inside the house, she set a pot of water to boil and busied herself with small tasks, wiping the table, straightening the chairs, adjusting the curtain that didn't really need adjusting. All the motions felt like ways to anchor herself, ways to avoid drowning in thoughts. The kettle whistled softly. She poured tea, watching the steam rise. Her hands trembled slightly, enough that she had to place the cup down before spilling it. A soft knock sounded at the door. Not forceful, not impatient, gentle. She knew that knock. When she opened the door, Mrs. Callum stood there holding a small basket covered with a linen cloth. Her gray shawl fluttered in the breeze, and her kind eyes searched Rebecca's face. "Thought you might need a warm meal," she said quietly. "I made stew today. Plenty to share." Rebecca felt her throat tighten. "You didn't have to trouble yourself." "I didn't." "Mrs. Callum smiled softly. "But I wanted to." She walked inside without waiting for an invitation, as a friend might when formality has already been replaced with familiarity. She set the basket on the table and reached out to touch Rebecca's arm. "You look worn thin, dear." Rebecca exhaled shakily. "I feel like the past clawed its way into the present, and I can't quite find all the pieces of myself after it." Mrs. Callum waited, giving her space. Rebecca's voice softened. "When Joseph spoke to me, it was like hearing a voice I spent years trying to forget. It twisted something inside me. A part of me reacted before I even understood what he said." "That's how old wounds behave," the older woman replied gently. "They don't need permission to ache." Rebecca looked down at her tea. "I keep thinking I should be stronger." "You are strong," Mrs. Callum said. "Strength isn't the absence of fear. Sometimes it's surviving it." They sat quietly for a moment, the room wrapped in the kind of silence that supports rather than suffocates. "Sheriff Dalton will keep a watch," Rebecca said. "But I feel exposed. That's natural." Mrs. Callum reached for her hand. "But you're not alone anymore." Rebecca's gaze softened. "Elias has been more than I expected, more than I knew how to hope for." Mrs. Callum gave her a knowing smile. "He cares for you. A great deal. If my eyes don't deceive me." Rebecca swallowed. "I worry Joseph will twist things. He always knew how to find the smallest crack in me. I fear he'll turn Elias into something he never meant to be. Men like Joseph don't understand hearts that grow beyond their control. Men like Elias do." Rebecca felt her eyes glisten. "When Elias stands beside me, everything feels quieter. But when he leaves," she hesitated. "The fear grows teeth. That doesn't make you weak." Mrs. Callum said, "It makes you human." Rebecca nodded, letting the warmth of her tea and her companion's words work through her chest. After a while, Mrs. Callum rose. "I should get back before the evening chill sets in. But I meant what I said. If you need anything, anything at all, I live only 5 minutes down the trail." Rebecca walked her to the door, grateful in a way words couldn't carry. As the older woman left, the last of the sunlight slipped behind the distant hills, casting long shades across the yard. Rebecca stepped outside, leaning lightly against the railing as twilight settled. The first stars pricked the sky. She didn't expect anyone else that evening. So when she heard the quiet crunch of footsteps approaching, her heart tightened for a moment before recognizing the cadence. Elias. He stopped a respectful distance away, waiting for her to acknowledge him. I wasn't sure if you'd be resting, he said softly. I wasn't. Her voice was quiet but steady. I'm glad you came. He stepped onto the porch, the glow of the lantern above them casting warm light across his face. His features were calm, though his eyes carried a question he hadn't yet voiced. I've been thinking, he began slowly, about what Dalton said, and about Joseph, and about you. She looked at him carefully. What are you thinking? That fear changes a person's footing, and that you shouldn't have to walk through this alone? He paused. I also want to be sure I'm not adding to the weight you're carrying. The sincerity in his tone pressed gently against her heart. You're not, she said. If anything, you help me breathe. He relaxed slightly, though a hint of concern remained. Rebecca, what do you want me to do? Truly? The question landed with unexpected depth. She looked out toward the darkening yard. I want to stand without shaking. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I want to hold on to the life I built here, and I want... Her voice softened. I want to stop feeling like one unexpected moment can undo me. Elias nodded slowly. Then let's face this one step at a time. If Joseph tries to pull you back, he will not succeed. The law is on your side, and so am I. Her heartbeat fluttered, not with fear this time, but with something warmer. There was a long silence between them before Rebecca spoke again. Elias, when you're near, I feel like I can stand tall, but part of me worries that depending on you makes me fragile. Elias shook his head gently. Dependence isn't fragility, it's connection, and connection is how wounds heal. Her eyes filled with a soft ache. Joseph always said needing someone was weakness, that it made me unreliable. Elias stepped closer, his voice low but sure. Needing someone doesn't make you unreliable. It makes you human. Everyone needs someone. Even the strongest souls lean somewhere. She looked up at him, the lantern light catching the faint lines near his eyes. And you? Who do you lean on? He hesitated, then answered honestly. I've leaned on myself for a long time, but I'm learning that walls built to withstand storms can also block out the sun. He held her gaze. Being beside you, it reminds me how much light I've missed. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the gentle truth in his words. The air between them felt tender, fragile in a way that held promise rather than threat. Elias, she said quietly, I don't know what comes next. Then we'll find out together, he replied. As the stars multiplied across the sky, a hush settled around them. Rebecca felt the weight in her chest shift, just slightly, not gone, but transformed. Something inside her lifted at the thought that she didn't have to face the shadows alone. She wasn't the woman Joseph once knew, and she wasn't the woman who had fled, trembling and unsure. She was someone rebuilding herself piece by piece, and for the first time, she felt those pieces forming something strong. Elias stayed on the porch with her until the evening deepened. They didn't speak much, but the companionable quiet between them held more assurance than any spoken promise. When he finally rose to leave, he touched the brim of his hat gently. I'll see you tomorrow. Rebecca nodded, her voice a soft murmur. Good night, Elias. As he walked down the path toward the road, she watched his silhouette fade into the darkness, each step steady and sure. The night felt less frightening now. Maybe healing didn't come in grand gestures. Maybe it came in evenings like this, in steady footsteps, in soft words shared under a lantern's glow, in the courage to breathe through the fear until the fear grew smaller. Rebecca stood for a long while after Elias disappeared, letting the cool night settle around her. Then she whispered to the quiet yard, I am not who I was, and I will not return to who he wants me to be. Her voice trembled, but it held truth, and truth was where strength began. Morning light drifted across the wooden floorboards of Rebecca's home, soft and golden. It should have been a peaceful hour, the kind that steadies a weary spirit. But her sleep had been thin, broken by uneasy dreams. She dressed slowly, her thoughts a tangle of old fears and new strength, then stepped outside to breathe the crisp Wyoming air. The sky stretched wide above her, pale blue and endless. She crossed the yard toward the barn, trying to quiet the restless ache inside her ribs. The animals stirred softly as she entered. Feeding them grounded her, reminding her of the life she had shaped for herself these past years. A life earned with effort, patience, and the quiet courage to keep moving. She had just stepped back into the daylight when she saw a figure approaching on the road. Her breath stilled. Joseph. He moved with a familiar steadiness, the same way he used to cross their old yard back in Aspen Brook. Shoulders square, steps deliberate, eyes fixed on his purpose. As he drew nearer, she could see he had groomed himself as if preparing for something significant. His shirt clean, his hair combed, his face calm in a way that unsettled her more than anger ever could. He stopped several feet away, leaving a pocket of air between them. Rebecca, he said softly, we need to talk. She didn't step back, though her heart urged her to. You shouldn't be here without the sheriff's knowledge. I'm not here to cause trouble. Joseph replied, I came because there are things you need to hear, things I didn't get the chance to say. The quietness in his voice should have soothed her. Instead, it tightened something low in her stomach. What is it you think I need to hear? She asked carefully. That our life together is not finished, he said. You left too soon. You didn't give me a chance to fix what was broken? Rebecca swallowed. Joseph, what was broken couldn't be fixed by silence or control. His jaw tightened briefly before he spoke again. I wasn't controlling you. I was protecting our home, our marriage. By keeping me isolated, by making decisions without me, by treating me like a responsibility instead of a partner. He lifted his hand slightly, almost in appeal. I did what I thought was right. I was raised to believe a man leads and a woman follows. You knew that? That doesn't mean I accepted it, she said quietly. I bent myself down to fit your rules until I couldn't breathe. Joseph's expression flickered. For a moment, something like regret crossed his eyes. I didn't realize how deeply you felt that way. You didn't want to see it, she replied. The silence between them thickened. Joseph took a slow breath. I walked more than 2,000 miles to find you. Through storms, through country I didn't know. I kept your name in my mouth like a prayer the entire way. Rebecca felt her heart tighten in a way she hadn't expected. There was sincerity in his tone, but sincerity was not the same as change. Joseph, she said softly, that journey doesn't erase what happened between us. He stepped closer, but not close enough to touch her. I thought you were dead when the cabin collapsed. I lost my mind with grief. When I found you gone, when I learned you had built a life here, it felt like betrayal. Her breath caught. I left because I had to survive, not to betray you. You were my wife, he whispered, and I was dying inside that marriage. She whispered back. You never saw it. His shoulders dropped. Something heavy and defeated passed through him. I just want you home. This is my home now. His face hardened then, the softness replaced by something old and familiar. Elias Ward, he said bitterly. Is he the reason you won't come back? Rebecca's pulse jumped. Elias has nothing to do with my decision. I left long before he ever entered my life. Joseph shook his head slowly. I saw the way he looked at you. A man doesn't watch another man's wife like that unless he thinks he has a right. I am not your wife anymore. The words hung in the air like a bell struck hard. Joseph flinched. His voice came out quieter. I searched for you because I believed God was giving us another chance. And I believe he gave me a chance to start over. She replied. Joseph's gaze darkened. You truly mean to stay here with him near you? I mean to stay here because it's where I found myself again. He took in a slow breath, holding it as if steadying a storm beneath his ribs. His next words trembled. So you're choosing him over me? I'm choosing myself, she said softly. For the first time, a muscle jumped in Joseph's jaw. If you refuse to come back, I need to hear it clearly. No hesitation, no confusion. Say it in a way even a stubborn man can understand. Rebecca held his gaze, her voice steady despite the tremor deep inside her chest. I am not returning to you. That life is over. Joseph closed his eyes. For a moment, she wondered if he might collapse. When he opened them again, they were glossy with unshed tears. I thought I'd die on that trail, he whispered. I kept walking because I believed you needed me. I needed freedom, Rebecca replied gently. A long silence stretched between them. The afternoon wind rustled through the cottonwoods, sending leaves fluttering to the ground. Joseph's breath came unevenly, like a man torn between anger and sorrow. Finally, he spoke again. If Elias harms you, if he fails you, if he breaks you, I will not forgive myself for letting you stay with him. Rebecca shook her head. He has given me nothing but respect. Joseph let out a shaky breath. I never meant to hurt you. I only knew the way my father taught me. I know, she said. But intent doesn't erase harm. He blinked slowly. So this is goodbye. Yes, she whispered. Joseph looked at her for a long moment, a look that held years of history, years of love warped by fear and silence, years she would never forget, but could no longer carry. He stepped back. Then I'll speak to the sheriff, he murmured. And I'll leave town before sundown. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected that. He turned away, walking slowly down the road, each step heavy, his shoulders bent as if carrying a burden he had never learned to share. Rebecca watched him until the dust settled behind him. Her legs trembled, and she sank onto the porch railing, pressing a hand over her heart. Tears gathered in her eyes, not for the life she lost, not for what she feared, but for the part of her that had spent years waiting to be heard. For the first time, she had spoken fully, and the world had not shattered. The silence around her felt different now. Not threatening, not hollow, just quiet. A quiet she had chosen for herself. Evening drifted gently across Cedar Valley, laying a soft blue veil over the land as the sun slipped beyond the distant ridge. Rebecca stood on her porch long after Joseph's figure had disappeared from the road, her breath unsteady, her heart echoing with everything that had just unfolded. It felt strange, not triumphant, not relieved. Something quieter. Something like mourning the ghost of a life she had already buried years before. She remained there until the shadows lengthened and the lantern at her door flickered with the shift in wind. Only when the chill seeped through the thin fabric of her sleeves did she step back inside. The house greeted her with a stillness that felt different from the one it held that morning. This quiet didn't press against her ribs. It didn't whisper old fears. It simply waited, open and spacious, as if finally acknowledging that the woman who lived here had reclaimed something important. She set about preparing a simple supper. Her hands moved slowly, thoughtful in every gesture. She broke bread, warmed stew from the basket Mrs. Callum had brought, and ate only a few small bites before resting her spoon. Her mind kept returning to Joseph's voice, the tremor in it, the weight of his final steps down the road. She had imagined countless endings to that chapter of her life. None had been as gentle or as painful as the one she had lived today. When the dishes were cleaned and the house had settled into night, she stood near the window. Moonlight poured over the yard in silver threads. And there, under the vast Wyoming sky, she finally let tears fall, not of regret, not of longing, but of release. The woman she had been with Joseph had lived inside her far too long. Tonight, that version of herself had finally been laid to rest. She didn't hear the approaching footsteps until they were close. Her breath caught, and she turned sharply toward the door. A soft knock sounded, not hurried, not demanding. She exhaled when she recognized the rhythm. Elias. Rebecca opened the door, finding him standing with his hat in hand, his face half lit by lantern glow. He looked as though he had debated whether or not to come, his posture respectful but uncertain. "I saw Joseph leaving town," he said quietly. "Thought you might need someone here." Her throat tightened. "He came to speak with me. It wasn't easy." Elias stepped closer, just enough that she felt the warmth of his presence. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. "No," she said. "But I'm shaken." He nodded, his voice low. "May I come in?" She stepped aside, inside. The room held the faint scent of stew and warm bread. Elias set his hat on the table, then paused as if searching for the right words. "I worried he might have pressured you," he said. "Or said something cruel." Rebecca shook her head. "No. Not cruel. Just rooted in the past. He wanted me to return, but I told him I wouldn't." A soft breath escaped him, something like quiet relief. "I'm glad you spoke your truth." Rebecca moved toward the window again, wrapping her arms lightly around herself. Elias watched her thoughtfully, giving her space but staying close enough that she could reach him if she needed to. After a long pause, she turned to face him. "Elias," she said softly. "I'm not sure what comes now." "Whatever you choose," he replied. "This is your life to shape, not Joseph's, not anyone else's." She stepped closer. "And you? Where do you stand in that life?" Elias hesitated, then answered with the candor she had come to trust. "I care for you, Rebecca, more than I intended, more than I planned to, but I won't push you into something before you are ready. Healing isn't a race." His words settled deep inside her, gentle and firm at once. She drew a slow breath. "Part of me is afraid that if I move towards something new, the old wounds will resurface, that I'll bring too much brokenness with me." Elias's gaze held steady. "Everyone has broken pieces. What matters is what you build with them." Rebecca felt something warm and fragile rise inside her chest. A place that had been sealed for years now cracked open, just enough to let in light. "Today, when I told Joseph goodbye, I expected to feel empty," she whispered. "And did you know?" She said, "I felt free. Tired, but free." Elias smiled softly. "That sounds like the beginning of something. Not the end?" She swallowed, her voice trembling with emotion she could no longer hide. "Being with you has taught me that quiet doesn't have to be frightening. That silence can be gentle." Elias stepped closer, closing the space between them with slow care. "Silence can hold a lot of things. Understanding. Patience. Hope." Rebecca looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the lantern's glow. "I think I've spent most of my life being quiet out of fear. But now I want my quiet to come from peace." Elias reached for her hand, not forcefully, but offering it as one offers a safe place to rest. "And you deserve that peace," he murmured. She let her fingers slip into his, feeling the warmth of his palm, the steadiness of his touch. A soft sound escaped her. Not a sob. Not a laugh. Something caught between the two. "I don't know how to start again," she whispered. "Then start small," he replied. "Start with breath, with steady ground, with knowing you're not alone." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting those words settle into her bones. When she opened them again, she felt steadier. "Elias," she said. "Yes, will you walk with me tomorrow? Just a simple walk. Nothing more." His expression softened with quiet pride, as though her request meant more than she realized. "I would be honored." She gave him a small, grateful smile. "Then tomorrow it is." As he prepared to leave, He paused at the door. Rebecca, I meant what I said before. I'm here. For as long as you want me. Her heart warmed. Thank you, Elias. He stepped into the cool night air, his silhouette bathed in moonlight. Before he walked away, he turned once more. You were brave today, he said. Rebecca's voice was soft. I finally chose myself. And that, he replied, is the strongest choice of all. When he disappeared down the path, Rebecca stood in the doorway, her hand resting where his warmth lingered in her palm. The night felt calm. The fear receded, leaving a fragile but genuine sense of hope. For the first time in years, she believed she might not just survive the future, she might actually live it. And as she looked out over the quiet valley that had become her home, she whispered into the cool air, "This is my beginning." It was not a declaration of victory. It was simply truth. And truth, she had learned, was the soil where healing grew, was the story he arrived late and chose the unwanted woman in front of everyone reminds us of a simple but powerful truth. Life does not always give us recognition, but it always leaves opportunities for those who are calm enough to listen to their own hearts. In our old age, we understand better than anyone that sometimes the most courageous choice is not to walk towards the crowd, but to dare to stand with the person who makes us feel at peace. Just like the character in the story, everyone has had old pains, but the most precious thing is that we can still start over, even late, with a sincere heart. Thank you for taking the time to listen and feel. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so that I can tell more healing and profound stories. I appreciate every interaction you have.